As you can see, it's nighttime here. I just finished reading the novella Rage by Stephen King. It was written under the name Richard Bachman. This was the first of the Bachman books, and it's out of print. I'm going to talk about some pretty heinous stuff here. So, this is a warning if you get triggered by talk about school shootings. You may want to turn this off because I am going to be talking about that subject. In fact, I'm going to talk about why this book is banned. It's a banned book, and I don't have a physical copy. I was able to find it and read it, and let's talk about why it's banned. So, on April of 26, 1988, an armed student at San Gabriel High School in San Gabriel, California, held 60 students hostage. He cited rage as an inspiration. On September 18th, 1989, a student at Jackson County High School in McKee, Kentucky, who was armed, took his history classroom hostage. Police found a copy of Rage in his bedroom. September 11th, 1991, a math class at Stevens High School in Rapid City, South Dakota, was held hostage. The hostage taker cited his inspiration for the incident was rage. Now, in these three incidents, there were no deaths, thankfully. Nobody died. Now we're going to get into the fatalities. On January 18th, 1993, East Carter High School in Grayson, Kentucky, an English teacher was shot in the head and a custodian was killed. The class was held hostage for 20 minutes. The student had just recently written an essay on rage prior to the shooting. On December 1997, 8 students were shot, 3 of them fatally, in Heath High School in West Paducah, Kentucky. The Richard Bachman omnibus was found in the student's locker, which included Rage. It was at this time that Stephen King asked the publisher to let the book go out of print. So, you can see why this book has been banned. Now, as far as the book itself, I read it. It's more of a novella than a novel. It was written under the Richard Bachman name, and I have to say it's not a very good book. It's really unrealistic and infantile, like it was written by a high school student, and that's because it was. When Stephen King wrote it, he was a senior in high school. At least that's when he started writing the manuscript. This book was rejected by the publisher, and Stephen King did some editorial on it. And following the success of Carrie and Salem's Lot and the movie of Carrie, by Brian De Palma, this book was published in 1977. However, the publisher did not want King putting it under his name because they don't want people releasing more than one book. At that time, they didn't want publishers releasing, authors releasing more than one book a year. They were afraid that it would interfere with sales, so he wrote it under the name Richard Bachman. He released several books under the Bachman name. This was the first one, 1977. The next would be The Long Walk, and then there's a couple more. Road Work, I think, is the other one, and then The Running Man, and the last one released was Thinner. And then it was outed that Richard Bachman and Stephen King were one and the same person. Around that time, I think it was like 1985. But just so you know, none of the Bachman books really sold very well at all. They didn't sell. Okay, like the highest selling of the Bachman books was Thinner, and I think it only sold 28,000 copies under King's name, or under Bachman's name, which was the highest selling of the books. But just to give you a an understanding, when it was re-released with Stephen King's name at the top, it sold like 280,000 copies. So clearly people are buying it for the name Stephen King. All right, now so far as Rage is concerned, what's the story about? I'm just going to give you the summary. I think that the book is pretty terrible. It's really poorly written. And this is just a case where I think Stephen King thinks he knows better than his publisher. I mean, this book was rejected as not being good enough to get published, but then he got some success and basically demanded that his book be published. Like he knows better. And it's a pretty poorly written book. It concerns a senior at Maine high school named Charlie Decker, who he's being expelled from school. So he meets with this principal. He gets called out of his algebra class to go to the office. He meets with the principal. He's being expelled because he had previously beaten his chemistry teacher with a pipe. Okay, he then torments the principal, and basically ticks the principal off so bad that he's going ready to go bananas. Taunts him. Then he walks out, he gets a gun out of his locker, sets his locker on fire, goes back to his algebra classroom, and immediately shoots his algebra teacher in the head. He then holds the classroom hostage as the fire alarm goes off and everybody's evacuating the building. One of the history teachers comes to the door of the classroom, and then he fatally shoots and kills the history teacher. He then proceeds to basically taunt all the authority figures, police, and the school psychiatrist or guidance counselor, whatever, and various other people over the course of the next 4 hours. The students, they begin to identify with him. So it's like Stockholm syndrome. Like, it's supposed to take a lot longer than this. In 4 hours, the students, they all come to Charlie's side, and it basically turns into the Breakfast Club, but with a dead teacher's body laying in the room, which makes no sense to me. They're all burying their souls and talking about their life problems and whatnot, like it's a John Hughes film. But there's a dead body there, and there's a dead teacher in the hall. It's really unrealistic and bizarre. So they all begin to regard him as a hero. It's off-putting. There's one character that tries to disarm Charlie. His name is Ted, and he's a jock. He basically has quit the football team because it's bore out why he quit the football team. It's exposed by this other kid named Pigpen that Ted's mother is an alcoholic, and that he had quit football to help take care of her. And anyways, it's just a big kerfuffle. All the students end up turning on Ted, and they beat him mercilessly and basically leave him in a state where he's just nonverbal. He's just totally in the state of shock. At which point Charlie, the police come in, storm the building, and Charlie doesn't have the gun anymore, and he tries to commit suicide by cop, and he gets shot 3 times, and he survives, and ends up in a psychiatric hospital. It's a 1-star crap fest. It's a horrible story. It's worse than The Stand. It's the worst Stephen King book. I I read it, I guess, out of curiosity to see why it was banned. I can see why it was banned. It's clearly the worst Stephen King book I've read. It's very infantile, very poor characterization, unrealistic. It's like a cartoon. And the fact that it inspired so many people to emulate, there's something, this is what's concerning, this is what's disturbing. People identified with, this character Chuck, right? Charlie Decker, and regarded him as an inspiration and then copied him. So, yeah, that's not cool, man. I'm not a fan of censorship and banning work, but there's this thing like this book should have never been published. I go back to that line from Jurassic Park, Dennis Nedry, just because you can doesn't mean that you should. You know what I mean? Like, Stephen King's so preoccupied with getting published that he didn't stop to think if he should get it published. And this book clearly should have never been published. It's trash. All right, that's it. That's my midnight review. Sleep tight.